History is often written in ink, but sometimes the most terrifying truths are hidden in silver nitrate. In the archives of the University of Oregon, a routine acquisition recently turned into a forensic nightmare. It began with a single image from 1878, a family standing before a sod-roof cabin on Flat Creek Ridge. At first glance, it is a standard portrait of frontier survival. But when archivists zoomed in on the timber frame above the door, the mundane dissolved into the macabre. Something was hanging there, something that wasn't supposed to be seen. And it would lead a team of researchers not just into the past, but to a cabin that against all odds was still waiting for them. Devin, a senior archivist, was the first to spot the anomaly. The batch, donated by a retired surveyor from Hillsborough, contained dozens of landscape shots. But the image labeled Swan Family, June 1878, demanded attention. The composition was rigid, two armed men flanking a cluster of women and a child. But the focal point wasn't the people. It was the doorway. Suspended by its hind legs was a rabbit, or at least the carcass of one. In frontier iconography, game was rarely displayed in formal portraits. It was messy, ungenteel. Yet here it was, dangling directly above the head of a young girl roughly 7 years old. Professor Alana Mercer, a specialist in 19th century visual culture, was called in. To her, the placement felt ritualistic rather than practical. But the true shock came when Devin found the second envelope. Buried deep in the donation box was the second glass plate print. Same cabin, same date, same armed men. But the woman seated on the ground to the right, the one closest to the child, was gone. She hadn't just stepped away. Digital analysis of the emulsion layer revealed a smear, a deliberate chemical abrasion. Someone had physically scrubbed her from the photographic plate, and the object above the door had changed. In the second image, the rabbit was gone. In its place was a dark, indefinable mass, hammered into the wood with distinct violence. This wasn't a retake. It was a rewrite of reality. Devin and Alana cross-referenced the date June 1878 with local records. Photography in this region was rare. A portable field camera was a luxury. To take two exposures minutes apart, only to alter the scene, implied a desperate motive. Their search for context led them to a startling entry in the 1981 Flat Creek Town Journal, referencing a local legend, the rabbit tree. The folklore spoke of a cabin where a rabbit nailed above the door wasn't a trophy, it was a boundary marker, a warning to stay silent. To confirm the location, they contacted Caleb Rowe, a local historian and descendant of the original Flat Creek homesteaders. When asked about the Swan cabin, Caleb didn't check a map. He simply said, "It's still there," the place where the girl never left. 48 hours later, the team stood at the edge of a forgotten clearing. The cabin was a rotting husk. The sod roof collapsed under a century of rain. But the front wall and the heavy timber door frame stood defiant. Devin climbed the debris to inspect the header beam. The evidence was preserved in rust and rot. A deeply oxidized nail, stains of organic matter soaking into the grain, and distinct gouge marks where something had been forcefully pried loose. Caleb produced a carpenter's ledger from 1878, recovered from his own family's shed. The entries were standard supply lists until the final week of June. A scribbled note in pencil read, "Beam sealed as instructed. Compartment built per Mr. Swan's orders. Asked no questions. Left before sundown." The timber above the door wasn't solid. It was a vault. Working with surgical precision, the team removed the face of the central beam. Inside was a cavity, insulated with horsehair and lined with tin. Wedged inside was a rusted metal box, sealed with a knot of fabric that had once been white. The contents dismantled the official history of the Swan family. First, a handwritten note from L. Swan, the patriarch. The handwriting was erratic, panicked. They said if we kept quiet, we'd be left alone. But Sarah wouldn't. She refused to go along. "I tried to protect Ruth. I told them Sarah left. Forgive me." The pieces clicked into place. Sarah, the woman erased from the second photo, had likely discovered a dangerous truth. A crime, an illegitimate lineage, or a land dispute that threatened the family's survival. To protect the child, Ruth, Sarah was removed. First from the photo, then, presumably, from the world. But the tin held one final image, dated 9 years later, August 1887. It showed the cabin, more weathered now. Standing in the doorway was a teenage girl, Ruth. She was alone. Her hand rested on the doorframe, directly under the beam. The rabbit was gone. In its place, nailed by their laces, hung a pair of child's shoes. In Victorian symbolism, shoes often represented a journey or a death. But on the back of the photo, Ruth had written 3 words: I remember. Goodbye. The team found a final document in the tin, a receipt for the Port Townsend rest home, dated 1901. Ruth hadn't died in that cabin. She had escaped. The shoes weren't a memorial to her death. They were a signal that she had walked away from the silence imposed on her family. Forensic reconstruction suggests that the rabbit in the first photo was a signal of chaotic warning Sarah tried to leave behind. When she was silenced, the family erased her image to maintain the facade of order, sealing the truth in the beam above the door. They thought they were burying a scandal. Instead, they preserved a confession. Ruth Swan survived the erasure. She grew up, she got out, and she left the evidence where only the curious would look. It reminds us that while you can crop a person out of a picture, you cannot scrub them from history. Sometimes the empty space screams louder than the subject ever could.